Boring history for sleep, the entire hilarious history of Henry VIII's 6 wives and more. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing ankle-deep in the brown edge of an English road sometime in the first years of the 16th century while winter mist crawls up from a slow river and gathers around your knees. Cold stone walls rise beyond the reeds, damp straw clings to your cloak, smoke hangs in the rafters of a roadside shelter behind you, and somewhere beyond the fog, monastery bells count an hour that nobody carrying a modern watch would find especially precise. Mud cakes your boots' torchlight wavers against an oak gate, and a line of horses breathes white clouds into the dark air. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here, not because you lack courage, but because your bed contains fewer fleas than the average royal residence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the gatekeeper decides whether you look honest, wealthy, or merely cold, leave a comment telling everyone where you are listening from and what the local time is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gate opens with the complaint of iron hinges, and you pass beneath an arch blackened by watchfires. A guard in a quilted jack raises a lantern, studies you briefly, then waves you through because the cart behind carries ale and is plainly more interesting. Timber houses lean over the lane as if sharing secrets, water drips from carved gutters, and a woman shakes old rushes from an upper window. You keep close to the wall while a butcher's boy drags a shutter into place. The smell of tallow, wet wool, wood smoke, onions, and horses blends into one heavy winter perfume. It is not unpleasant, once you stop hoping it will become something else. At a corner shrine, a beeswax candle burns before a painted saint whose face has faded until he looks mildly surprised to find himself still employed. A traveller presses 2 fingers to the stone and whispers a prayer for safe roads. Some swear that St. Christopher's image can protect anyone who looks upon it from sudden death for the rest of the day, though no one can quite agree whether the protection lasts until sunset midnight or simply until the next broken cartwheel. The road ahead leads toward London and beyond London, toward the royal palaces where a young king is preparing to marry a Spanish princess who has already spent years waiting for England to decide what to do with her. You do not hurry. Nobody sensible hurries on a winter road unless pursued by debt soldiers or a particularly determined goose. Instead, you follow the slow current of merchants, servants' clerks, pilgrims, mule drivers, and minor gentlemen moving south beneath a sky the colour of pewter. At the inn yard, you settle near a fire that gives more smoke than heat. Supper arrives in a wooden bowl, pea and leek pottage, coarse bread, and smoked fish tough enough to have survived the Norman conquest. You tear the bread into the broth while an ink-stained clerk reads a royal proclamation aloud. The old King Henry VII is dead. His son now wears the crown. The words have travelled faster than most people, carried by mounted messengers, copied by scribes, repeated in market squares, and embroidered by every mouth along the way. The new king is Henry VIII, not yet 18 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, red gold-haired, and said to be handsome enough to make courtiers forget the cost of his clothes. He dances, hunts, wrestles, composes music, speaks several languages, and appears determined to be everything his careful father was not. Where the late king counted coins, the young king scatters them into tournaments, pageants, fine horses, musicians, and cloth of gold. It is a promising start for tailors. Those who tell the tale never fully agree on how much of the brightness belongs to Henry himself and how much is polished onto him by men hoping to prosper. In candlelight, a new reign always looks golden. The taxes of the old reign seem lighter when collectors are briefly uncertain whom to obey, and every tavern philosopher discovers that he always believed the prince destined for greatness. You settle beneath a wool blanket in the loft, though sleep arrives in pieces. Rain taps the roof. A dog with one torn ear circles twice near your feet and lies down, as if he has chosen you for reasons he does not intend to explain. Near midnight, bells drift across the fields from a religious house beyond the town. Their sound is soft and hollow, spreading through rain and darkness. The dog lifts his head, listens, then sleeps again. You follow his example. Before dawn, the inn wakes around you. Boots thud on planks. Someone coughs into the ashes. A servant trims a half-burned candle and mutters that the wick has mushroomed, which is considered by some to foretell the arrival of a stranger. This seems less prophetic in an inn where strangers arrive constantly, but nobody wishes to offend an omen before breakfast. You drink weak ale because the water barrel looks capable of supporting its own small kingdom, then step back into the wet cold. The road narrows between hedges, silvered with frost. Crows rise from ploughed fields. Peasants in coarse wool bend over ditches, repairing banks washed out by rain. At a manor boundary, a wooden post bears the Lord's mark, and beside it hangs a dead fox, displayed as proof that someone has earned a reward. Farther on, you pass a village where smoke escapes through roof holes in slow blue threads. Pigs root near the churchyard wall. A woman carries an iron key at her girdle large enough to open an oak chest or possibly stun a burglar. Inside the little church, painted saints, devils, kings, and martyrs crowd the walls. Near the altar stands a silver container said to hold part of a saint's finger. The reeve insists it cured a fever. A merchant insists the same saint has 9 fingers scattered across England. Even now it is hard to tell whether this troubles anyone. You pause only long enough to warm your hands near the church porch, then continue south. By midday, the rain stops. The road becomes a long ribbon of churned earth marked by hooves, wheels, and footprints. A cart ahead has lost one wheel and leans into the ditch like a tired animal. Its owner, a cloth merchant, stands beside it with the stunned expression of a man who has just discovered that saints are not contractually obliged to protect axles. You and 3 others help lift the cart, while a carpenter wedges the wheel back into place. In return, the merchant gives you a strip of dried apple and enough gossip to occupy the next 10 miles. He speaks of the Princess Catherine of Aragon. She has lived in England since arriving as a young bride for Prince Arthur Henry's elder brother. Her wedding to Arthur was magnificent, filled with banners, church music, costly fabrics, and all the ceremonial confidence of two kingdoms arranging the future. Yet Arthur died only months later at Ludlow, leaving Catherine a widow while still barely more than a girl. Since then, her position has shifted with every negotiation. At times, she is treated as a treasured princess. At times, she is an expensive guest. At times, her household lacks money for food, fuel, and proper clothing, because diplomacy is grand in council chambers and rather drafty in actual rooms. The merchant lowers his voice, though there is nobody near enough to hear, except you, the dog who has followed from the inn and a hedge. He says the new king intends to marry her. This is not exactly a surprise. The match has been discussed for years, yet the death of Henry VII and the accession of his son have transformed a dusty arrangement into immediate expectation. Catherine is 6 years older than Henry. She is learned, devout, composed and descended from Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, rulers whose names carry the weight of armies, ships, and ambitious priests. Henry, meanwhile, is young enough to believe that youth itself is a political philosophy. The road rises, and through bare branches you see London smoke towers and haze along the river. Traffic thickens, monks ride with their robes tucked from the mud, and a pilgrim displays a lead shrine badge on his hat. At a toll point, an official counts pack animals and collects pennies as if every sack contains taxable wool or concealed treason. You pay pass on and enter the outskirts, where houses gather more tightly beside the road. Here the world seems louder. Hammers strike in workshops, bells ring from different parishes, none entirely agreeing on the hour. Apprentices call from doorways. A baker sets loaves on a board while a customer complains that one is too light. Bread is regulated by weight and price, and a dishonest baker may face public punishment, which explains why he holds the loaf as carefully as a jeweller displaying a crown. The dog still follows. You offer him the last of the dried apple. He rejects it, proving that medieval dogs also possess standards. As evening draws in, you reach a lodging house near the river. The Thames moves darkly beyond warehouses and stairs carrying barges, refuse reeds, and reflections of fire. Across the water palace, windows shine in scattered lines. Somewhere within those walls, servants polish plate, cooks turn spits. Laundresses carry linen, and clerks copy lists for a coronation and a wedding. Great events depend upon thousands of small hands, most of them cold. You sit near a brazier while your cloak steams. A suspicious monk occupies the opposite bench, guarding a leather-wrapped bundle on his lap. He claims it contains a relic brought from Canterbury. The innkeeper claims it contains cheese. The monk does not open it, so both possibilities remain alive. Talk circles around the new king. Men say Henry plans a magnificent coronation. Women say Catherine will be queen. A veteran of the old king's household remembers Henry as a bright child, kept mostly in the shadow of his elder brother. Another insists the prince always knew he would rule. No one can quite agree whether Henry's decision to marry Catherine is born from affection, chivalry, politics, obedience to his father's earlier plans, or the simple delight of choosing quickly now that nobody can stop him. Perhaps all of these motives sit together inside him, as crowded as travellers on an inn bench. You imagine the young king moving through torchlit galleries attended by gentlemen in fur-lined cloaks. He is surrounded by music-polished armor, Latin phrases, sweet wine, and the intoxicating knowledge that every person in the room watches his expression before deciding what to think. He has inherited a stable treasury, a crown secured by his father's caution, and a court eager for splendor. He also inherits Catherine, or rather the long question of Catherine, waiting with dignity while men debate her future. Beyond the lodging house, the palace bells sound over the river. One, then another, then a third answers from farther away. You step outside beneath the eaves. Mist gathers again on the Thames. Boatmen call softly in the dark. Torches move along the opposite bank like slow stars. Tomorrow you will cross toward the court and see the machinery of royal celebration turning into motion. Tonight you remain among damp cloaks, iron keys, murmured rumours, and the smell of wet wool. The half-burned candle from the inn seems to have followed you in memory, its small flame bending whenever a door opens. The dog curls beneath your bench. The suspicious monk snores without releasing his bundle. And somewhere beyond the mist, Henry prepares to become not merely king but husband to the woman who has waited through widowhood, poverty negotiation, and uncertainty for the gates of her future to open. Morning comes pale across the Thames, and you wake to the scrape of benches, the rattle of iron keys, and the suspicious monk discovering that his leather-wrapped relic has been investigated by the dog. The bundle does, in fact, contain cheese. Whether the cheese is sacred remains undecided. You cross the river in a narrow boat while mist drifts between the banks. The palace grows clearer with every stroke of the oars' towers, chimneys, tiled roofs, long galleries, and banners hanging damply in the morning air. Servants crowd the landing stairs. Barrels of wine roll toward storerooms. Carts unload flower capons, lamp oil, beeswax, candles, spices and folded cloth bright enough to make the grey river seem embarrassed by its own colour. Inside the outer court, rushes have been spread over the stone floors, mixed with lavender, sweet woodruff, and dried herbs to soften the smell of so many boots, dogs, fireplaces, and bodies. The upper layer is fresh. Beneath it lies an older history best left undisturbed. A servant warns you not to drop anything valuable unless you are willing to abandon it to archaeology. The palace prepares for celebration. Henry is to be crowned beside Catherine, and the wedding that has been discussed, delayed, doubted, and renegotiated is suddenly accomplished with surprising speed. They marry quietly at Greenwich in June 1509, without the long public spectacle that might be expected after years of diplomatic argument. Catherine wears her auburn hair loose beneath a modest headdress, while Henry stands young, confident, and eager to begin his reign as if kingship were a tournament entered at sunrise. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether Henry already loves her deeply or loves the shining idea of himself beside her. Catherine is graceful, educated, and royal in every gesture. She has survived uncertainty without appearing broken by it. To Henry she offers legitimacy, alliance, admiration, and the romance of rescuing a princess from neglect. It is a very convenient form of chivalry. Days later, London fills for their coronation. You move with the crowds along streets washed, swept, and decorated with painted cloth. Houses display tapestries from upper windows. Guilds erect stages where figures representing virtues, saints and ancient kings deliver speeches that last longer than anyone's feet remain comfortable. Wine runs from public fountains, though some swear the strongest flow is quietly redirected into private jugs before ordinary people reach it. Henry rides beneath a canopy dressed in crimson velvet and cloth of gold. Jewels flash at his collar. His horse is richly trapped, and the young king sits with the easy strength of someone who has spent much of his life hunting, riding, and being told he looks excellent doing both. He smiles often. Every smile travels through the crowd like sunlight breaking across water. Catherine follows, in a litter hung with white and gold. Her gown is pale, her jewels carefully chosen, her face composed beneath the weight of watching eyes. People cheer the Spanish princess who has waited so long to become their queen. She acknowledges them with a calmness that seems almost effortless, though you who have already learned that effortless royal behavior usually requires several sleepless servants and at least one frightened master of ceremonies. At Westminster Abbey, incense rolls beneath the high arches. Candles burn around saints' images and royal tombs. The stone floor is cold through your souls. Monks chant, while nobles stand in ranks ordered by title, family privilege, and the likelihood of becoming offended. Henry and Catherine are anointed, crowned, and presented before the kingdom as king and queen. The bells begin before the service ends. They pour over London from tower after tower, until the air itself seems made of bronze. Outside, people shout, "Drink, pray, bargain," and steal unattended pies with equal enthusiasm. The coronation feast occupies Westminster Hall beneath a hammer-beamed roof darkened by centuries of smoke. Fires blaze. Trumpets announce each course. Servants carry roasted meats, spiced custards, fish shaped into elaborate dishes, marchpane castles, sugared fruits and pies decorated with heraldic animals. Most guests eat from trenchers of bread using knives and fingers while wiping grease on linen cloths. Forks remain suspiciously foreign objects, and a person using one risks looking as though ordinary fingers have failed some secret moral test. You stand among lesser attendants near the edge of the hall where the food arrives, cooler, but the gossip is warmer. Henry laughs loudly, drinks deeply, and watches entertainments arranged in his honour. Musicians play lutes, shawms, and drums. Dancers move between tables. Costumed figures represent England, Spain, victory, peace, and several abstract qualities that become difficult to identify after the third cup of wine. Catherine sits beside him with quiet assurance. She speaks French, Latin, and Spanish, and understands the habits of courts better than many men who advise the king. Her mother, Isabella, ensured that her daughters received serious educations. Catherine reads theology, follows political affairs, and keeps her household disciplined. She also possesses the patience required to listen while elderly bishops explain matters she already understands. The early months of the marriage carry genuine warmth. Henry visits Catherine's chambers, sends affectionate messages, and includes her in the glittering life of the court. They hunt together through green parks where deer move beneath old oaks. They attend mass beneath painted ceilings. They listen to music in candlelit galleries and watch tournaments where Henry enters the lists in shining armour, sometimes disguised under romantic names that fool nobody. He delights in display. At jousts, his devices speak of loyalty, courage, and secret devotion. Catherine distributes prizes and smiles when he performs well. Some swear that Henry's armour gleams so brightly that opponents are defeated before the first lance breaks, though this opinion is usually expressed by men hoping for royal employment. You follow the household through the first hopeful seasons. At Greenwich, Richmond, and other royal residences, winter stores are counted, tapestries aired, feather beds carried from chamber to chamber, and kitchens kept busy from before dawn. Catherine hears petitions, gives alms, supports scholars, and maintains Spanish attendants among her English household. At Epiphany, gifts are exchanged. During Lent, meat disappears from the royal table and smoked fish arrives in quantities capable of testing anyone's devotion. Henry remains energetic, handsome, and attentive. He writes music, discusses theology, practices archery, and spends freely from the treasury accumulated by his father. The court feels young again. Old caution gives way to bright fabrics, tournaments, masks, and feasts beneath hundreds of candles. For a little while, the marriage seems to promise everything expected of it: affection between husband and wife, friendship between kingdoms, and children who will secure the Tudor future. Catherine's rooms glow with firelight. Her prayer books rest beside embroidered cushions, and Henry's footsteps are frequently heard approaching through the gallery. Beyond the palace walls, monastery bells mark the passing hours. The dog waits near the kitchen's now suspiciously rounder. The half-burnt candle is finally replaced. England settles beneath its young golden king and admired queen, while hope, still untested, warms the cold stone chambers more gently than any fire. The warmth does not vanish all at once. It fades by small degrees like the glow beneath ash when nobody notices the fire needs tending. You remain close to Catherine's household as the court moves from palace to palace, carrying bed's plate tapestries, chests, prayer books, hunting dogs, musicians, cooks' clerks, and enough linen to clothe a modest village. Royal life appears settled, yet every journey hides the same urgent hope. The king and queen need a living son. Catherine becomes pregnant, and the palace fills with careful whispers. Her ladies measure time by saints' days, moon phases, and the subtle changes in her appetite. Certain foods are avoided, certain prayers are repeated. A small charm may be sewn into a sleeve, and relics are brought near her chambers. Some swear that coral protects an unborn child from evil influences, while others recommend amber eagle stones or a strip of parchment bearing holy words. No one can quite agree whether these objects work, though nearly everyone agrees that refusing one would be tempting misfortune. When the time approaches, Catherine enters confinement. You watch the windows of her chamber covered and the doors guarded. The room is darkened to imitate the safety of the womb. Fires burn despite the close air. Heavy tapestries seal out drafts because cold wind is believed capable of harming both mother and child. Only selected women enter. Men remain outside, where they discover that waiting is far more difficult than giving advice. The first child is a daughter born too early and lost almost at once. The court lowers its voice. Masses are said, candles are lit. Catherine returns to public life with composure, though grief follows her quietly from chapel to chamber. Henry comforts her and still appears confident. They are young and there will be other children. In January 1511, a son is born. The bells erupt across London. Bonfires blaze. Wine is distributed. The infant is named Henry, Duke of Cornwall, and celebration spreads through court and city as if the whole kingdom has exhaled together. You stand among servants in a crowded yard, while ale passes from hand to hand. The dog from the kitchens appears beneath a table wearing a strip of blue ribbon, though nobody admits tying it there. The king orders tournaments, pageants, and feasts. Lances splinter beneath painted shields. Trumpets sound through cold air. Henry rides beneath the devices, praising the newborn prince and the strength of the Tudor line. Catherine receives congratulations from ambassadors who bow low enough to inspect the rushes. For 52 days, the future seems secure. Then the child dies. The bells sound again, slower now. You hear them before dawn, carrying over the river through fog. The same bronze voices that celebrated the prince now toll for his burial. Servants fold away tiny garments. Priests arrange candles. Courtiers speak of God's will because no safer explanation exists. Catherine mourns deeply, yet she is expected to recover, pray, appear, and try again. More pregnancies follow. Some end too early. Another son is born but does not live. Each confinement begins with cautious hope and closes with quieter corridors. The royal nursery remains prepared. Cradle blankets, swaddling bands, warming pans, painted saints. It waits with the patience of furniture. Daily life continues around sorrow. In the kitchens, pottage thickens in blackened pots. Fish is salted for Lent. Rushes are replaced in the Queen's rooms. Laundresses beat linen beside cold water. Apothecaries bring syrups of rose, quince, and herbs. Physicians examine urine in glass vessels and discuss its colour with great seriousness, a practice that allows them to appear knowledgeable without asking the patient too many inconvenient questions. Catherine prays at roadside shrines when the court travels and gives offerings to churches. She keeps relics near her and follows prescribed fasts, though physicians sometimes advise stronger food. Some remedies involve herbs such as sage, rue, or motherwort. Others depend upon charms, planetary hours, or prayers written backward. Even now it is hard to tell whether anyone truly trusts these cures or simply fears being the person who refuses the one that might have worked. In February 1516, at Greenwich, Catherine gives birth again. This child lives. She is named Mary. There is relief, celebration, and genuine affection, but beneath it lies disappointment that nobody states too plainly near the king. Henry praises his daughter and says that sons may follow. Catherine holds Mary with a tenderness sharpened by memory. The baby grows strong with pale skin and the unmistakable dignity of an infant who expects everyone else to adjust the blankets correctly. You see Mary's household formed around her. Nurses rock her near the fire. Gentle women supervise clothing, linen, and feeding. A cradle is hung with protective objects, and attendants watch for draughts. Her first teeth, first steps, and first words become matters of record. She receives a level of ceremony that might surprise anyone accustomed to babies being allowed private negotiations with porridge. Henry is proud of her intelligence. Catherine oversees her education and insists upon disciplined music, languages, and devotion. Mary becomes an important princess, but she is not the male heir the dynasty expects. Years pass. Catherine grows older. Henry remains active, though patience comes less naturally to him than dancing. The court still shines with cloth of gold, but anxiety settles beneath the splendor. Every ambassador listens for news of pregnancy. Every physician becomes briefly important. Every feast contains someone calculating the future of England between courses. Catherine's last known pregnancy ends without the son Henry wants. By then, she has endured repeated loss and years of expectation. Her devotion deepens. She attends mass, supports scholars, distributes alms, and presents the calm face of queenship even when hope has become exhausting. Henry begins to examine the marriage differently. He remembers that Catherine was once married to his brother Arthur. He hears theologians debate ancient law. He wonders whether the absence of a living son is punishment rather than misfortune. Those who tell the tale never fully agree when private grief becomes political argument, or when Henry first begins convincing himself that his marriage is cursed. For now he still sits beside Catherine in chapel. Mary plays in guarded chambers. Beeswax candles burn before saints. Wet wool dries near palace hearths. The kitchen dog grows old and sleeps through most bells. Yet something has shifted behind the oak doors. The king's longing for a son is no longer only a hope. It is becoming an obsession, and somewhere within the crowded galleries, another woman is beginning to attract his attention. The woman does not arrive with thunder prophecy or any of the useful warnings that would save a kingdom a great deal of paperwork. She appears instead in the ordinary manner of court life, moving through candlelit chambers. Chapel processions, dances, hunting parties, and long evenings when musicians play softly beneath soot-dark rafters. Her name is Anne Boleyn. You first notice her, not because she is the most conventionally beautiful woman at court, but because everyone seems to notice when she turns her head. She is dark-eyed, quick, slender, and alert, with long fingers suited to embroidery music and the careful handling of other people's attention. Years spent in the courts of the Netherlands and France have given her polished manners, fashionable clothes, and a confidence uncommon among young English gentlewomen expected to smile, obey, and avoid appearing clever enough to alarm anyone. Anne does not avoid it. She speaks French easily. She dances with controlled grace. She plays the lute and sings in a low voice. She understands how to give an answer that sounds respectful while leaving the listener uncertain whether he has been praised or quietly corrected. Some swear that she possesses a sixth finger on one hand, though no reliable account proves it. Such stories often gather around women who become inconveniently powerful, especially when ordinary explanations seem less entertaining. Her family is ambitious but not obscure. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, is a diplomat and courtier. Her sister Mary has already attracted Henry's attention and possibly become his mistress, though those who tell the tale never fully agree about the length or importance of that relationship. Anne, however, appears determined not to follow the same path. Henry begins to watch her. At first, The attention resembles his other courtly flirtations. He writes verses, joins masques, sends tokens, and adopts the manner of a knight, sighing for an unreachable lady. Such performances are fashionable. Married men praise women who are not their wives, ladies accept ribbons and poems, and everyone pretends the rules are clear. They are not. You see Anne seated near a window in the Queen's apartments, sewing black silk into a linen sleeve while rain taps the glass. Catherine remains Queen. Anne is one of her attendants. The arrangement is delicate enough to make even the palace cat walk carefully. Henry sends Anne gifts. She returns some of them. He sends messages. She answers cautiously. He offers affection without marriage. She refuses the bargain. This refusal changes everything. Anne understands the value of distance. Whether her resistance begins from moral conviction, ambition, caution, genuine reluctance, or some changing mixture of all four, no one can quite agree. What is clear is that she will not accept the uncertain position of royal mistress, praised in private and discarded when convenient. If Henry wants her, he must offer more. The king, accustomed to doors opening before he touches them, becomes fascinated by the one that remains closed. Letters begin to pass between them. Henry's surviving messages reveal impatience, longing, jealousy, and a surprising amount of emotional confusion for a man whose servants arrange nearly every other part of his day. He complains about distance. He asks for reassurance. He signs himself with affectionate marks. He sends a bracelet, a jewel, perhaps a hunted animal, or some other romantic object requiring several servants to deliver. Anne answers less freely, and many of her replies do not survive. This makes her seem even more elusive. Henry, surrounded by people eager to agree with him, discovers the rare and thrilling discomfort of waiting. You travel with the court between Greenwich, Windsor, Eltham, and other royal residences. The roads are muddy, the horses damp, and the wagons heavy with chests, beds, plate tapestries, kitchen equipment, and bundles of rushes. At each stop, the same quiet drama resumes. Henry finds occasions to speak with Anne. Anne remains near enough to encourage hope and distant enough to preserve her terms. At meals, the king sits beneath cloth of estate while servants bring venison, capons, spiced wine pottage, and trenchers of bread. Anne may be several places away, speaking calmly with another courtier. Henry watches. A monarch can command armies, summon bishops, and empty a room with one frown. Yet he cannot prevent a woman from appearing interested in someone else's conversation. It is perhaps the closest he comes to ordinary suffering. Catherine notices. She has spent decades learning how to remain composed, while ambassadors, physicians, priests, and courtiers assess her body and marriage as matters of state. She understands the danger before many others do. She does not confront Anne dramatically across a feast table. Tudor palaces are filled with watchers, and a queen's dignity is armour. Instead, she continues attending mass, managing her household, writing letters, and standing beside Henry in public. Princess Mary grows older and shows promise in music, languages, and learning. Catherine takes comfort in her daughter. Yet Mary's existence also reminds Henry that he has no legitimate son. The old anxiety sharpens each time Anne withdraws from him. By 1527, the king's courtship has become bound to a larger purpose. Henry begins seeking a formal end to his marriage. He claims that marrying his brother's widow violated divine law, despite the papal permission that allowed the union. He points to scripture. He studies arguments. He listens eagerly to anyone who suggests heaven itself may support his desire. A suspicious monk you once met near the Thames would probably call this a remarkable coincidence. Anne encourages reform-minded books and ideas circulating quietly through Europe. Some are imported in saddlebags hidden beneath cloth or passed between trusted hands. The printing press allows arguments to travel faster than bishops can comfortably condemn them. Anne may not be a theologian in the formal sense, but she understands that religious debate can serve political change. At night, palace corridors glow with torchlight. The half-burned candles return in rows along oak walls. Wet wool steams near hearths. Servants whisper while carrying basins and folded linen. Somewhere a clerk copies another letter. Somewhere else, Catherine kneels before a relic she has trusted for years. Henry waits for Anne's answer, and Anne waits for Henry to make the impossible possible. The court senses that this is no passing flirtation. The king's desire has attached itself to his fear, his pride, his dynasty, and his belief that divine favour should resemble his personal preference. What begins as a private pursuit now presses against the laws of church and kingdom. Anne still refuses the usual bargain. Henry, increasingly unable to imagine refusal as permanent, prepares to change the bargain itself. The bargain does not change in one stroke. It changes by letters, hearings, whispered alliances, delayed replies, and the slow wearing down of every man unfortunate enough to stand between Henry and the answer he wants. You follow royal messengers along rutted roads to bishops' houses, monasteries, manor courts, and council chambers where fires burn low beneath soot-black rafters. Their leather satchels contain arguments about scripture, marriage authority, and inheritance. Their boots contain most of the English countryside. At Westminster, clerks sit beneath narrow windows copying documents until their fingers stiffen. Quills scratch across parchment. Sand is shaken over wet ink. Wax seals are pressed with rings and official matrices. A single letter may require a calfskin sheet, a trained scribe, several witnesses, a mounted courier, and 3 weeks of rain before reaching a man who intends to ignore it. The king's chief minister, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, carries the burden first. He is wealthy, brilliant, experienced, and accustomed to arranging difficult matters through diplomacy. Yet this difficulty stretches beyond England. Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, holds enormous power in Europe, and Pope Clement VII has little desire to offend him. Rome delays. Commissioners are discussed. Evidence is gathered. Every answer leads to another question. Henry's argument rests upon the claim that his marriage to Catherine should never have been valid because she had been married to his brother Arthur. Catherine insists that her marriage to Arthur was never physically completed and therefore created no obstacle. She speaks with firmness born from faith memory and the knowledge that accepting Henry's case would declare her marriage sinful and her daughter illegitimate. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether Henry convinces himself completely or simply learns to speak his desire. in the language of conscience. He studies scripture late into the evening, marking passages and consulting scholars. A king searching holy books for permission resembles a man searching a pantry for the last honey cake. He may call it devotion, but everyone understands the direction of his attention. In 1529, a court meets at Blackfriars to hear the marriage case. You stand near a doorway, among servants, minor officials, and curious onlookers, while the great hall fills with bishops, lawyers, nobles, and ambassadors. Catherine appears before Henry, kneels, and appeals directly to him. She reminds him of their long marriage, her obedience, and the years they have shared. Then she refuses the authority of the court and leaves. The room remains silent after her departure. Henry watches her go, and even those who support him seem uneasy. Catherine has not shouted. She has not pleaded weakly. She has simply denied that English proceedings can erase a marriage blessed by Rome and lived for 2 decades. The hearing fails to give Henry what he wants. Wolsey falls from favour. His houses, wealth and influence cannot protect him from the king's disappointment. He dies before he can face a full trial, and leaving behind palaces large enough to remind Henry that confiscation is one of monarchy's more comforting remedies. New advisers rise. Thomas Cromwell, the son of a blacksmith, understands administration, parliament, and the practical uses of law. Thomas Cranmer, a scholar and churchman, suggests that universities and theologians across Europe might judge the king's marriage. Anne's family gains influence. Reformers circulate books questioning papal power. The private courtship becomes tied to a wider movement already stirring through Christendom. You travel beside commissioners who visit religious houses, libraries, and learned men. University scholars receive carefully worded questions and sometimes carefully applied pressure. Opinions return in bundles. Some support Henry, others do not. No one can quite agree whether certain favourable judgments are inspired by theology, diplomacy, or the persuasive arrival of royal officials. Meanwhile, ordinary life continues beneath the growing quarrel. In monastery guest houses you eat oat pottage with onions while bells mark matins, Lord's prime, and the rest of the sacred day. Monks copy texts, tend herb gardens, brew ale, feed travellers, and preserve saints' relics in silver boxes. One abbey claimed to possess a fragment of the true cross. Another claims a feather from an angel's wing. A sceptical groom observes that the feather looks remarkably like it came from a goose, but he says this only after leaving the gate. Rumours spread through markets faster than official proclamations. At a fish stall, one woman insists the Pope will curse England. At a cloth booth, a merchant says the king will become Pope himself. A butcher says little because he is weighing mutton and has learned that political opinions rarely improve sales. By 1532, the pressure increases. Clergy are forced to acknowledge Henry as supreme head of the English Church, though the phrase is softened with a clause accepting it only as far as divine law allows. Such phrases are useful because each side can pretend they mean something different. Anne's position changes with the law around her. She is granted titles, lands, and a household. Henry travels with her more openly. They visit France, where she is treated with the ceremony due to a woman nearing queenship. When they return to England, their marriage takes place secretly, probably in early 1533. Even now it is hard to tell the exact date, which is surprising considering how many clerks Henry employs. Anne is pregnant. The king can no longer wait for Rome. Cranmer becomes Archbishop of Canterbury. A court convenes at Dunstable and declares Henry's marriage to Catherine invalid. His marriage to Anne is recognised as lawful. Parliament passes measures cutting appeals to Rome and establishing that England is an empire governed by its own sovereign. The authority of the Pope is pushed beyond the borders by statutes, oaths, sermons, and the threat of punishment. You hear proclamations read in market squares while rain darkens the timber posts. Priests alter their prayers. Manor officials record new requirements. Monks whisper over supper. Some people welcome reform. Some fear it. Most continue paying tolls, mending roofs, salting fish, and hoping powerful men will finish arguing before the next harvest. Catherine is no longer called Queen by the King's government. She becomes Princess Dowager of Wales, a title she refuses in spirit even if clerks write it on every document. Mary is separated from her mother. Anne prepares for coronation, surrounded by silk jewels, musicians, and enemies. The kingdom has not broken cleanly. It has bent, strained, and split along lines of faith, loyalty, family, and law. Henry has gained the marriage he demands, but the cost already reaches far beyond the palace. Across England, monastery bells continue to mark the hours, though their sound now carries a question no one yet knows how to answer. The bells continue through the spring of 1533, but their meaning changes as you follow the royal household back toward London. What once sounded like a warning now becomes celebration command and carefully managed approval. Anne Boleyn is no longer the woman waiting beyond an oak door. She is queen pregnant, richly dressed and carried toward of her coronation beneath banners that declare the future already settled. The city prepares with painted stages, fresh rushes, garlands, and temporary fountains running with wine. Workmen hammer through the night. Guild members rehearse speeches praising Anne's virtue and fertility, two qualities the court has decided to announce before either has been fully tested. Along the streets, cloth hangs from windows, and carved figures represent saints, prophets, and hopeful infants. Anne travels by river in a decorated barge, surrounded by boats bearing musicians and officials. The Thames glitters beneath early summer light, though it still carries enough refuse to remind you that ceremony and sanitation rarely share a barge. Cannons fire from the tower. Trumpets answer across the water. Anne sits beneath cloth of gold, visibly pregnant, receiving cheers that range from sincere enthusiasm to the cautious noise of people checking whether their neighbours are cheering. At Westminster, she is crowned with St. Edward's crown, an honour intended to emphasise that she is no temporary companion, but the lawful Queen of England. Incense fills the abbey. Bishops chant, beeswax candles burn before the altar, and nobles stand in places determined by rank ancestry and the willingness to argue about both. Anne appears triumphant, yet the triumph carries weight. Her marriage has transformed laws, ruined ministers, divided families, and challenged the authority of Rome. All of it now rests upon the child beneath her jewelled gown. In September, she enters confinement at Greenwich. The chamber windows are covered. Tapestries close out the daylight. Fires thicken the air. Women bring relics, charms, and carefully prepared foods. One old custom recommends placing an eagle stone near a woman in labour because the hollow stone contains another stone within it and therefore symbolises safe delivery. Some swear it prevents miscarriage. Others say it must be tied to the thigh at precisely the correct moment. No one can quite agree who first persuaded an eagle to surrender one. Outside, Henry waits for the news he expects. The child is born healthy. She is a girl. The prepared letters announcing the birth contain a space for the word prince, and a second letter must be added so that the royal infant becomes a princess. It is a small correction in ink and a much larger one in expectation. The baby is named Elizabeth. Henry conceals his disappointment and celebrates publicly. Anne holds her daughter surrounded by crimson cloth embroidered cushions, nurses, and attendants. Elizabeth has her father's colouring and her mother's alert gaze. She is given a grand household at Hatfield where servants manage her cradle clothes, meals, and linen with the solemnity due to a possible future monarch, though almost nobody yet imagines that future clearly. For a time, Anne remains powerful. She promotes reforming clergy, supports scholars, gives alms, and intervenes in appointments. She reads religious works and owns finely decorated books marked with her initials. She can be generous, sharp-witty, impatient, and politically involved. These qualities once made her irresistible to Henry. As queen, they become less convenient. Catherine still lives, refusing to surrender her title in her own mind. Princess Mary refuses to recognize Anne or accept herself as illegitimate. Anne sees Mary not merely as a stubborn girl, but as a focus for resistance. Their households become centres of rumour, loyalty, and quiet hostility. Meanwhile, Anne becomes pregnant again. The palace holds its breath, but the pregnancy ends. Another follows with the same unhappy result. Each loss narrows the space around her. Henry once interpreted Catherine's failed pregnancies as evidence that their marriage displeased heaven. Anne now faces the dangerous possibility that he may apply the same reasoning twice, which would be unfair but impressively consistent. In January 1536, Catherine dies at Kimbolton Castle. Henry and Anne appear in yellow garments soon afterward. Some claim yellow signifies celebration. Others insist it is a colour of mourning in Spain. Even now it is hard to tell whether the choice is cruel, diplomatic, misunderstood, or simply the result of a wardrobe servant having a difficult morning. Anne is pregnant once more. Then Henry suffers a serious fall during a tournament. He lies unconscious for a time, and news reaches Anne. Soon afterward, she loses the child, reportedly a boy. The failure changes the atmosphere around her. Henry has already begun noticing Jane Seymour, one of Anne's attendants. Jane is quiet, where Anne is outspoken, pale, where Anne is dark, and careful to present herself as modest and obedient. Royal taste, you discover, often develops in direct opposition to the current wife. Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's ally, turns against her after disputes over policy, money, and influence. An investigation begins with startling speed. Musicians, gentlemen, and servants are questioned. Anne is accused of adultery with several men, including her own brother George, and of imagining the king's death. The charges are sensational, contradictory, and supported by evidence that remains deeply doubtful. Dates place Anne in locations where some alleged meetings could not have occurred. Confessions are extracted under pressure. Gossip hardens into testimony because the king now desires an exit as strongly as he once desired entrance. You move through corridors where voices drop as footsteps approach. Iron keys turn in locks. Letters disappear. Men who laughed at Anne's table now study the rushes and remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Anne is arrested and taken by barge to the Tower of London. She enters through the same fortress that greeted her before her coronation, but the trumpets are gone. In her chambers, she alternates between fear, prayer, nervous laughter, and attempts to understand who has accused her. Her ladies report every word. No one can quite agree whether Henry believes the accusations or merely finds belief useful. At her trial, Anne defends herself with composure, but the verdict has already settled over the hall like winter smoke. She is found guilty. Her marriage is annulled, making the adultery charge legally peculiar, though legality has become remarkably flexible. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, Anne walks onto the scaffold within the tower. She wears a dark gown and an ermine mantle. The executioner has been brought from Calais and uses a sword rather than an axe. Anne speaks briefly, praises the king, asks for prayers, and does not challenge the judgment directly. The end comes swiftly, and without the graphic spectacle later storytellers sometimes prefer. Her body is placed in an old arrow chest because no proper coffin has been prepared. She is buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula beneath the stone floor. That evening, candles burn in the palace as usual. Servants carry supper. Guards change watch. Elizabeth sleeps far away in her nursery, too young to know that her mother has disappeared from the royal household and nearly from official memory. Henry waits only days before marrying Jane Seymour. The bells sound again, but they no longer seem capable of telling celebration from mourning. The bells have scarcely finished carrying Anne's death across London when the court changes its colours. Bright fabrics do not disappear, but they seem quieter. Music still drifts through galleries, though the tunes are gentler and the dancers more careful. Servants replace embroidered hangings, remove devices bearing Anne's falcon, and search storerooms for badges connected to Jane Seymour. Royal households are remarkably efficient at forgetting yesterday's symbols, especially when yesterday has become dangerous. You watch painters cover initials on walls and craftsmen reshape old decorations. Where Henry and Anne once appeared as paired letters beneath a crown, Anne's mark is scraped away, painted over, or altered. In one chamber, a carved H and A remains faintly visible beneath new gilding, a small ghost concealed above the rushes. Jane does not enter queenship like Anne. She arrives softly. She is dressed in rich cloth, but her gowns avoid the sharp French styles Anne favoured. Her headdresses are English, framing her pale face in stiff, embroidered wings. She speaks carefully, lowers her eyes at useful moments, and presents herself as modest, obedient, and peaceful. Whether this reserve reflects her true nature, deliberate strategy, or the survival instinct of a woman who has just watched her predecessor fall, no one can quite agree. Jane's family comes from the lesser nobility, respectable but not dazzling. Her father's home at Wolf Hall is comfortable rather than princely, with oak chests, smoky fireplaces, and servants who know the importance of keeping winter stores dry. Her brothers Edward and Thomas Seymour quickly discover that having a sister admired by the king improves one's prospects almost as effectively as inheriting land. Henry marries Jane on May the 30th, 1536, only 11 days after Anne's execution. The speed is striking, even in a court accustomed to hurried arrangements. Priests complete the ceremony. Clerks record the union, tailors work by candlelight, cooks prepare feasts. The machinery of royal marriage turns again with barely enough pause to clean the trenches. You stand in a chapel where beeswax candles glow beneath painted saints. Henry appears relieved rather than passionately dazzled. Jane seems composed. The king gives her jewels and lands, yet her public coronation is delayed. Some say plague in London makes a great gathering unsafe. Others suggest Henry waits to see whether she can produce the son for whom two queens have already suffered. Jane understands the expectation. Her badge is the phoenix rising from a castle, a hopeful image for a court eager to imagine renewal. She chooses the motto, bound to obey and serve, words perfectly suited to Henry's current understanding of marriage. After Anne's sharp arguments and political involvement, Jane offers calm agreement. A queen who promises obedience has a particular charm for a husband who has recently reorganized the church to avoid contradiction. Yet Jane is not entirely without purpose. She works to reconcile Henry with Princess Mary. Mary has spent years refusing to accept her parents' marriage as invalid and herself as illegitimate. Her resistance has brought isolation, illness, reduced status, and relentless pressure from royal officials. Jane speaks gently on her behalf and urges Henry to restore his daughter to favour. Henry agrees only after Mary submits to his authority and acknowledges the invalidity of Catherine's marriage. It is a painful surrender. Mary signs the required statements, possibly believing she has no safe choice. Soon afterward, she returns to court. You see her arrive beneath a grey sky, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak. Jane welcomes her with warmth. Henry receives Mary again, and for a brief while the royal family appears less divided. Elizabeth Anne's daughter remains acknowledged but illegitimate, living in her own household under watchful attendants. Jane sends her gifts as well, though the little girl's presence must remind everyone how quickly royal favour can change. Jane's court values order. Her ladies dress modestly. Games, music, and embroidery continue, but the atmosphere lacks Anne's restless brightness. At supper, venison pottage, coarse bread, and sweetened custards arrive beneath silver covers. Jane eats carefully while physicians observe her complexion and appetite with the intrusive devotion reserved for queens expected to conceive. Daily remedies surround her. She may drink mixtures of herbs, wine, and honey. Physicians recommend rest, certain meats, or avoidance of particular winds. An old household belief warns that sitting on cold stone may harm fertility, so cushions appear wherever Jane might pause. Some swear that wearing a girdle touched to a saint's relic assists conception. Such girdles pass quietly between noble women carrying prayers, sweat, and generations of anxious hope. Outside the palace, England remains unsettled. The dissolution of smaller monasteries begins. Royal commissioners inspect religious houses, record their wealth, question their conduct, and prepare properties for closure. Reports describe corruption, though their truth varies. Some monasteries are poor and disorderly. Others feed travellers, care for the sick, employ villagers, preserve books, and keep bells sounding across lonely countryside. In the north, resentment grows. People fear religious change, rising taxes threaten traditions, and the loss of local monasteries. The pilgrimage of grace gathers thousands beneath banners displaying the wounds of Christ. Nobles, priests, farmers, and craftsmen march in protest. Henry promises to hear grievances, then later punishes leaders after the movement collapses. Jane reportedly kneels before him and asks mercy for the rebels. The king warns her not to interfere in affairs of state and reminds her what happened to the last queen who became involved. The message is not subtle. Jane withdraws. At night, you pass her chamber and hear only the murmur of prayers. Her ladies bank the fire, fold linen, and check that oak shutters are fastened against damp air. A half-burned candle leans in its holder. The old dog who once followed you from the inn has vanished from court, perhaps retired to some kitchen, where politics cannot reach beneath the table. Early in 1537, the long-awaited news arrives. Jane is pregnant. The court responds with restrained hope. Nobody celebrates too loudly. Too many cradles have been prepared and emptied. Jane's meals are watched. Her journeys are limited. Charms, relics, prayers, and medical opinions gather around her like layers of wool against winter. Henry becomes attentive. He sends gifts and asks after her condition. Tournaments are moderated, music softened, and plans prepared for the birth. The king, who once dazzled Anne with pursuit, now surrounds Jane with protection. As summer passes, Jane's body grows heavy with the future of the Tudor line. She moves slowly through galleries where Anne's initials remain hidden beneath fresh paint, and Catherine's memory lingers in Mary's face. The court waits once again beside a prepared cradle. This time, Henry believes the silence will finally be broken by the cry of a son. The cradle waits through the last warm weeks of 1537, while the court moves carefully around Jane as if one careless footstep might disturb the entire future of England. You remain near Hampton Court, where red brick walls hold the day's warmth after sunset, and the river passes quietly below the palace gardens. Servants carry baskets of linen into the Queen's apartments. Midwives inspect cloths, basins warming pans, swaddling bands, and small cushions. Apothecaries prepare rosewater oils, herbs, and sweet syrups. Priests say masses for a safe delivery. Every candle burns beneath the attention of someone who has been instructed not to let it go out. Jane enters confinement in September. The doors close, windows are covered, tapestries darken the chamber, and fires burn until the air becomes thick with smoke, perfume, and anxious heat. The custom is meant to protect mother and child from dangerous draughts and excessive light. It also creates a room in which breathing feels like a minor act of rebellion. Women attend Jane while Henry waits beyond the sealed apartments. Hours become days. Labour begins, pauses, and begins again. Messengers move between chamber doors and council rooms, carrying updates so vague that nobody knows whether to feel hopeful or terrified. Some swear that the birth lasts nearly 3 days. Others count the hours differently. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether physicians consider surgical intervention, though later legends claim Henry is asked to choose between wife and child and chooses the child. The story is almost certainly too neat-shaped by generations eager to make the king sound colder than the October stone. At last, on October 12th, the sound everyone has waited for rises from behind the oak doors. A child cries, a son. The news travels through the palace faster than fire along dry rushes. Henry receives it with triumph. Courtiers bow, smile, and immediately begin calculating what the birth means for their own families. Bells ring from parish churches and abbeys, bonfires are prepared, wine flows in London. Prisoners may receive pardons, the poor receive alms, and musicians discover that every tune can be played louder when a prince has been born. The baby is named Edward. You see him only from a respectful distance, wrapped tightly in fine linen and placed in a grand cradle beneath embroidered cloth. He is small pink and entirely unaware that 2 marriages, a religious revolution, several executions, and years of national anxiety have prepared the room for his arrival. Henry calls him his most precious jewel. Jane is exhausted but joyful. After so many lost pregnancies in Catherine's chambers and so much expectation surrounding Anne, the court treats Edward's survival as a divine answer. Heralds proclaim the birth. Letters are dispatched across Europe. Ambassadors prepare congratulations. Tailors begin work on ceremonial clothing for a child who currently requires little beyond warmth milk and the willingness not to cry during important visits. On October the 15th, Edward is baptized in the chapel at Hampton Court. The ceremony takes place late in the evening beneath hundreds of candles. Processions move through galleries lined with guards and household officers. Noble women carry the infant beneath a canopy. Princess Mary serves as godmother, and Elizabeth, still a little girl, is brought to witness the occasion. The 2 half-sisters stand near the brother, whose existence reshapes both their positions. The chapel glows with gold, silver, crimson cloth and reflected flame. Water is blessed. Prayers rise. The prince receives his name before nobles, bishops, and courtiers whose knees have begun to ache from ceremony, but whose faces remain dutifully radiant. Afterward, the procession returns slowly through the palace. Mary carries the baby for part of the way. Elizabeth walks beneath the watch of attendants. Jane does not attend because childbirth customs keep her confined, but she receives reports of every detail. For several days, all appears well. Then Jane becomes ill. At first, her weakness seems expected after the long labour. She rests beneath wool blankets while attendants change linen and physicians discuss her pulse. Soon fever rises. She becomes restless and thirsty. Her condition worsens. The doctors offer remedies familiar to the age: cooling, drinks, herbal preparations, purging, perhaps bleeding, and close examination of urine. One recommends quiet. Another recommends a change of air despite the sealed chamber. A third may suggest that the balance of humours has been disturbed, an explanation broad enough to sound convincing while solving almost nothing. Some believe that spoiled food causes her sickness. Others blame retained material after childbirth or infection carried during the delivery. Modern understanding points toward complications such as puerperal fever, but in Jane's chamber there are only herbs, prayers, heated arguments, and hands that do not yet understand how easily illness passes from one patient to another. Relics are brought near her bed. Candles burn before saints. A charm is placed beneath the pillow. Some swear that a piece of red coral can draw fever away, though the coral remains cool while Jane grows hotter. Henry receives reports in nearby rooms. His triumph becomes fear. He sends physicians prayers and instructions, but kingship offers no command capable of lowering a fever. Jane weakens through the following days. Her attendants whisper. The palace grows quiet again, as if celebration itself has become something shameful. On October 24th, 12 days after Edward's birth, Jane dies. The bells that celebrated the prince now toll for his mother. Henry is genuinely grieved. Jane has given him the son he wanted and died before time can complicate his memory of her. He later describes her as his true wife, a judgment made easier by the fact that she never lives long enough to resist him, disappoint him again, or grow older beside him. Jane's body is prepared for burial. Her ladies wash and dress her, surrounding her with the dignity expected of a queen. She lies in state beneath candles while prayers continue day and night. Princess Mary acts as chief mourner, dressed in dark clothing and performing ceremonies that keep her close to the memory of the woman who helped restore her to court. The funeral does not take place immediately. Royal mourning unfolds slowly through vigils, masses, black cloth, heraldic display, and formal grief. Jane is eventually buried at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, where Henry will one day choose to lie beside her. Meanwhile, Prince Edward remains in a separate nursery guarded by elaborate rules. His rooms are scrubbed, his clothes are washed carefully. Few people may approach him. Anyone showing signs of sickness is kept away. His food, air, bedding, and attendants are watched with anxious precision. The court has received its heir and now treats every sneeze as potential treason. You pass his chamber at night while a nurse rocks him near the hearth. Beyond the door, the palace lies dim and still. Rain touches the windows. A monastery bell marks the hour across the river. Henry has gained the son for whom he altered his marriage, church, and kingdom, yet the woman who gives him that victory is gone, and the cradle rocks gently in a room where triumph and mourning have become impossible to separate. The cradle continues rocking at Hampton Court, but the palace around it soon begins looking outward again. Prince Edward is protected behind guarded doors, warmed by fires wrapped in fine linen, and watched by attendants who record nearly every cough. Henry, meanwhile, remains a widower, and a widowed king with one small son is still considered a political problem wearing velvet. Edward may be healthy today, yet children in royal nurseries are no safer from fever than children beneath thatched roofs. England needs alliances, and Henry's council begins searching Europe for another queen. You follow the first discussions through rooms crowded with maps, letters, wax seals, and men pretending marriage is a matter of calm calculation. France offers possibilities, the Holy Roman Empire offers others. Protestant territories in Northern Europe become increasingly attractive because England now stands apart from Rome and may require friends who share its distrust of papal authority. Thomas Cromwell sees an opportunity in the German Duchy of Cleves. Cleves lies among territories whose rulers possess influential soldiers, relatives, and complicated religious sympathies. Its Duke William has two unmarried sisters, Anne and Amalia. A marriage between Henry and one of them might help build a defensive alliance against Catholic powers. It might also strengthen Cromwell's position by linking the king's household to reform-minded princes. The difficulty is that Henry has never seen either woman.
Royal marriages have long been arranged without personal meetings. Family dowry, territory, health and fertility usually matter more than shared laughter beside a hearth. Yet Henry considers himself unusually qualified to judge beauty, especially when the beauty is expected to become his wife. He asks for accurate portraits. This request sounds simple until you remember that portraiture at court is rarely a neutral business.
A painter sent to depict a princess must satisfy the king, who commissions the work, the family hosting him, the advisors negotiating the marriage, and the woman who would prefer not to be remembered as the face that ruined an alliance. Too much flattery creates danger later. Too much honesty may end the negotiation before supper. Hans Holbein the Younger receives the task. You travel in imagination beside him across wet roads and crowded river crossings, carrying brushes, pigments, prepared panels, letters of introduction, and the knowledge that the shape of a duchess's nose may alter English diplomacy. Holbein is already celebrated at Henry's court. He paints faces with calm precision, rendering fur velvet jewels, embroidery and skin so carefully that even powerful men look temporarily mortal. At inns along the route, you warm your hands over smoky fires and eat pottage from wooden bowls. Merchants discuss wars and grain prices. Pilgrims display lead badges from Aachen and Cologne. One traveller carries a charm made from a wolf's tooth, said to prevent weariness on long journeys. Some swear that it works only if the wolf died facing east. No one can quite agree how anyone verifies this afterward. Holbein reaches the ducal court and studies Anne of Cleves. She is around 24, raised in a household more restrained than Henry's glittering palace. Her education emphasizes needlework, household management, obedience, and religious duty rather than music, poetry, or fluent French. She dresses according to German fashion with a stiff headdress concealing much of her hair. She may not know the elaborate dances favoured in England, but she understands dignity and the patient stillness required when a painter studies your face for hours. Holbein produces a small portrait. Anne appears with pale skin, lowered eyes, a composed mouth, and richly decorated clothing. Her hands rest together beneath sleeves heavy with gold ornament. The portrait offers neither theatrical flattery nor cruelty. It shows a calm young woman enclosed by ceremony. Henry approves. No one can quite agree whether the portrait truly delights him, or whether politics' impatience and Cromwell's recommendations persuade him that delight will follow. The king asks questions about Anne's appearance. Reports return praising her face, her health, and her suitability. Courtiers accustomed to surviving royal moods discover that hopeful descriptions are often safer than precise ones. Negotiations advance. There is, however, an old complication. Anne was once informally promised to Francis of Lorraine. The arrangement occurred when both were children and may never have formed a binding marriage contract. Lawyers examine the matter. Documents are copied, witnesses offer statements the proposed English marriage cannot proceed, while anyone suspects Anne belongs, even technically, to another man. Clerks work late beneath beeswax candles. Their fingers stain with ink. Seals are checked. Phrases are revised until every uncertainty appears respectable. Eventually, assurances arrive that the childhood agreement is dissolved and Anne is free to marry. Across the sea, preparations begin. Tailors sew new gowns. Servants pack linen plate, devotional books, and household objects for a journey to a country Anne has never seen. Chests are bound with iron, fur-lined cloaks are aired, horses are selected. English officials argue over where she should land, who should greet her, and how much ceremony can be arranged in winter without losing half the procession to mud. Anne leaves Cleves in late 1539. Her route carries her through towns bright with torches and churches filled with winter incense. She travels with ladies, gentlemen, interpreters, guards, and wagons that seem to reproduce whenever the road narrows. At each stop, civic leaders offer speeches, gifts, sweet wine, and meals arranged upon trenchers. Anne receives them politely. She is leaving behind familiar language, customs, family, and landscape for a husband whose reputation has already crossed Europe ahead of her. Even the most loyal diplomat knows that 3 previous wives make an unusual introduction. She reaches Calais, where bad weather delays the crossing. Wind lashes the harbour. Rain strikes shutters, ships strain against ropes while sailors examine the sky with the grave suspicion of men who know saints' charms and royal commands cannot calm the channel. A small image of St. Nicholas, protector of travellers, is carried aboard. One sailor ties a scrap of red cloth near the mast to discourage storms. The storm remains professionally unimpressed. At last Anne crosses to England. She lands at Deal and begins the slow journey inland. Towns welcome her with bells and pageants. Crowds gather beside muddy roads to see the woman who may become queen. She smiles, bows, and endures long ceremonies in a language she barely understands. Henry waits impatiently. He decides to surprise her before their formal meeting, following the romantic custom in which a disguised nobleman approaches his bride and is recognized through the mysterious power of true love. This works beautifully in courtly tales where everyone has already seen the illustrated manuscript. At Rochester, Anne rests in her lodgings while rain darkens the windows. Rushes cover the floor. A half-burned candle leans in its holder. Her ladies adjust her headdress and servants dry wet cloaks near the fire. Outside, Henry approaches in disguise, carrying the confidence of a man who expects legend to behave on command. The marriage negotiations are complete. The portraits have crossed the sea. The alliance waits beneath the same winter mist that once gathered around your boots. And Anne of Cleves, unaware that a romantic test is about to enter the room, prepares to meet the king, who has already decided that the painted woman will become his fourth wife. The disguised king enters Anne's chamber at Rochester with the confidence of a hero, stepping into a romance, though the room itself is less cooperative. Wet cloaks steam near the fire, rushes crackle beneath muddy boots. A servant carries in a basin of warmed water, and the half-burned candle on the table gives a small, uncertain flicker, as if it has already guessed that the scene will not proceed according to poetry. Henry approaches Anne without announcing himself and embraces her. Anne stiffens. She does not recognize him. This is hardly surprising. She has never seen Henry except through reports, coins, and perhaps flattering images. The man before her is no longer the golden young prince who danced through early tournaments. He is nearly 50, broad, heavy, richly dressed, beneath his disguise, and accustomed to being recognized even when deliberately pretending not to be recognized. Anne responds politely but without romantic delight. She turns her attention back to the entertainment before her, leaving Henry to stand in the uncomfortable silence of a man who has arranged his own surprise and discovered that surprise works in both directions. He withdraws, changes into royal clothing, and returns openly. Anne now bows and greets him as king. Courtesy replaces confusion, but Henry's mood has already darkened. The courtly test has failed. In a story, true love should have recognized him through wool cloak winter gloom and several decades of physical change. In an actual chamber, Anne has simply behaved like a sensible foreign princess confronted by an unfamiliar gentleman. The king complains to his companions. He says he does not like her. Over the following days, Henry studies Anne with increasing dissatisfaction. He criticizes her appearance, her clothing, her manner, and the portrait that encouraged the match. He tells Cromwell that Anne is not as she was represented, yet Holbein's painting remains remarkably careful and realistic. No one can quite agree whether Henry truly feels deceived or whether embarrassment at Rochester poisons everything that follows. Anne continues towards London, unaware of the full depth of his displeasure. She is received with ceremonies, bells, gifts, and crowds. At Greenwich, her household settles into royal rooms where tapestries block winter draughts and charcoal braziers struggle against damp stone. Her ladies unpack gowns, linen shifts, embroidered caps, prayer books, silver vessels, and small packets of herbs used to sweeten rooms or discourage moths. One English custom puzzles. Some of the German attendants' fresh rushes mixed with herbs are laid across floors, yet older layers may remain beneath. Rosemary and lavender disguise what the broom does not entirely remove. A courtier assures them this is both practical and fragrant. The courtier does not lift the rushes. The marriage is scheduled for January 6, 1540. Henry searches desperately for a lawful reason to escape it before the ceremony. Lawyers examine Anne's childhood betrothal. Ambassadors are questioned. Documents are reread. The answer remains inconveniently clear. The old arrangement appears dissolved, and Anne is free to marry. To refuse now would damage England's alliance with Cleves and humiliate everyone involved. Henry proceeds. The wedding takes place at Greenwich. Anne wears a gown of cloth of gold embroidered with pearls, and her jewelled headdress rises stiffly around her face. Henry stands beside her in rich fabric and fur. Archbishop Cranmer performs the ceremony, musicians play noble's bow, and servants prepare the feast, while the bride and groom enter a union that one of them already wishes finished. At supper, roasted meats, spiced dishes, bread trenchers, and wine fill the tables. Anne conducts herself with dignity. Henry performs the expected gestures but lacks warmth. Courtiers smile carefully, for there are few environments quieter than a wedding feast where everyone suspects the groom is furious. That night, the marriage remains unconsummated. By morning, Henry discusses the matter with his closest companions. He claims Anne is physically unattractive and suggests that her body has discouraged him. His descriptions are unkind and medically meaningless, but men around him listen with solemn faces. A king may say something foolish. The court's duty is to make it sound constitutional. Anne, meanwhile, seems confused about what marriage requires. According to later reports, she tells her ladies that Henry kisses her good night and good morning, and she believes this may be sufficient to become pregnant. Her attendants gently explain that royal succession usually demands a little more effort. Whether Anne is truly so innocent or merely protects her reputation is uncertain. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. A woman publicly admitting that her husband avoids her risks humiliation, while a woman pretending innocence may preserve both dignity and legal safety. The marriage limps through winter and spring. Henry visits Anne's chamber occasionally, but claims nothing happens. He becomes increasingly attentive to Catherine Howard, one of Anne's young maids of honour. Catherine is lively, pretty, and several decades younger than the king. Once again, Henry's dissatisfaction with one wife brightens his opinion of another woman nearby. Thomas Cromwell understands the danger too late. He arranged the Cleves alliance and defended the marriage. As Henry's anger grows, Cromwell's enemies gather. In June, he is arrested during a council meeting and taken to the Tower. The man who helped dissolve Henry's first marriage and build the royal supremacy now discovers that administrative brilliance offers little protection from personal disappointment. The king moves against the marriage. Anne is sent away from court officially because of plague. She stays at Richmond while officials prepare the annulment. They cite the earlier betrothal, Henry's lack of consent, and the failure to consummate the union. The arguments do not fit together perfectly, but Tudor law has learned to stretch when the king requires more room. Anne receives the news with remarkable calm. She does not imitate Catherine of Aragon's resistance. She does not fight for her title or summon foreign allies. She agrees to the annulment and signs letters acknowledging that the marriage is invalid. Perhaps she understands Anne Boleyn's fate. Perhaps advisers warn her. Perhaps she simply prefers survival to a crown shared with Henry. Her cooperation is richly rewarded. Henry grants her estates, houses, income, jewels, and the honorary position of the king's beloved sister. She receives Richmond Palace, Hever Castle, and other properties. She remains in England independent, wealthy, and treated with respect at court. She no longer has to share Henry's bed, satisfy his dynastic expectations, or fear each pregnancy. It may be the finest divorce settlement in Tudor history. Anne adapts to English life. She visits Mary and Elizabeth, attends court festivities, plays cards, buys fine clothes, and manages her households. She keeps servants' horses, gardens, kitchens, and storerooms filled with salted meat candles, grain, and wine. Her English improves. Her reputation becomes warm and generous. Henry marries Catherine Howard only weeks after the annulment. Cromwell is executed on the same day, though Henry later complains that his advisers destroyed a faithful servant. This is generous hindsight from the man who signed the order. Anne of Cleves outlives Henry and every other wife except Catherine Parr. She never returns permanently to her homeland. Instead, she settles into the peaceful strangeness of being neither queen nor prisoner, neither widow nor wife. As evening settles over Richmond, you see her seated near a bright hearth beneath an English wool blanket, eating sweet cakes while rain touches the windows. The marriage nobody can pretend has ended, and Anne has escaped with land's dignity and her head still comfortably attached. The rain continues against Richmond's windows while Anne of Cleves enjoys the safest position Henry has ever granted one of his former wives. Beyond her warm chamber, however, the royal court is already turning toward another face, another set of embroidered sleeves, and another hopeful beginning, arranged beneath candlelight. Catherine Howard enters Henry's attention almost like music from an adjoining room. She is young, lively, graceful, and skilled in the small arts that make a court seem brighter than it is. She dances well, she laughs easily. She wears French-style gowns with square necklines, fitted bodices, and sleeves decorated with pearls or gold thread. When she moves through the Queen's former apartments, gentlemen notice, ladies whisper, and servants pretend not to watch while seeing everything. Catherine belongs to the powerful Howard family. She is a cousin of Anne Boleyn, though the connection is not emphasized too loudly near the king. Her uncle is Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, an experienced nobleman who understands that family influence grows wherever royal affection takes root. Catherine's father, Lord Edmund Howard, possesses noble blood but little money, proving that ancestry may open palace doors without necessarily paying the household bills. As a girl, Catherine has lived in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. The great house contains many young attendants, shared sleeping chambers, unlocked passages, music lessons, gossip and supervision that becomes remarkably thin after dark. Beds are crowded. Curtains offer more privacy than walls. Servants carry candles between chambers, and iron keys pass through so many hands that a locked door often represents only a polite suggestion. In that household, Catherine attracts attention from men before she enters the royal court. Her music teacher, Henry Manox, becomes familiar with her. Later, Francis Dereham, a secretary in the Duchess's service, forms a closer attachment. They exchange affection, gifts, and promises. Some accounts suggest they regard one another almost as husband and wife. Others insist the relationship is less formal. No one can quite agree whether their words amount to a binding pre-contract, though in Tudor England a private promise followed by intimacy may carry serious legal consequences. For now, these memories remain behind her like footprints beneath fresh snow. At court, Catherine serves Anne of Cleves as a maid of honour. Henry notices her before his fourth marriage has properly begun. She offers everything Anne seems not to offer him: youth, familiarity, easy conversation, English manners, and admiration that requires no interpreter. Henry is nearly 50. Years of feasting, injury, frustration, and power have changed him. His old tournament wound troubles his leg. Exercise becomes difficult. His body grows heavier, yet his idea of himself remains connected to the Golden Prince who once danced, hunted, and broke lances before cheering crowds. Catherine allows him to feel that Prince has not entirely vanished. You see them during an evening entertainment beneath a ceiling darkened by smoke. Beeswax candles stand in silver branches. Musicians play viols and lutes while dancers cross the floor in measured patterns. Catherine steps lightly between courtiers, her sleeves flashing with tiny jewels. Henry watches from a cushioned chair, then joins the company for a gentler dance. The king laughs more often when she is near. His advisers notice. Her relatives notice. Anne of Cleves probably notices as well, though she has already learned that noticing Henry's affections and challenging them are entirely different occupations. Henry marries Catherine on July 28, 1540, the same day Thomas Cromwell is executed. Celebration and punishment share the calendar with typical Tudor economy. The marriage is announced publicly soon afterward. Catherine becomes queen dressed in velvet, satin, pearls, and cloth of gold. Henry gives her jewels once worn by earlier queens. Old pieces are reset. Initials are changed. Goldsmiths work late beside small furnaces because royal romance creates excellent employment for anyone skilled at removing one woman's emblem from another woman's necklace. Catherine chooses the motto, "No other will but his." It is a wise phrase for Henry's wife, though perhaps not a restful one. The court becomes livelier. Music sounds late into the evening. There are dances, hunting parties, card games, masks, and banquets where swans, peacocks, venison, spiced custards, and sugared fruits appear upon broad tables. Catherine enjoys clothing and receives costly gifts: jeweled brooches, chains, rings, embroidered gowns, and small dogs suited to sitting upon cushions rather than chasing anything useful. Henry calls her his rose without a thorn. The phrase tells you more about his hopes than about Catherine. Every rose has thorns. A court simply employs people to hide them beneath ribbons. Catherine behaves generously toward attendants and relatives. She asks favors for friends, gives presents, and brings familiar faces into her household. This is ordinary royal patronage, but it also places people from her earlier life dangerously close to the king's chambers. Francis Derham eventually receives a position in her household. His arrival brings old memories into new rooms. Another man, Thomas Culpeper, also moves near the Queen. He is a gentleman of the King's privy chamber. Handsome, confident, and accustomed to royal service, Catherine seems drawn to him. Whether their relationship becomes romantic, at once develops later, or remains suspended between flirtation and intention is uncertain. Those who tell the tale never fully agree because surviving evidence comes through frightened witnesses, formal interrogations, and words spoken when truth itself has become dangerous. For now, the court sees only brightness. You follow the royal progress northward in 1541. Henry travels with Catherine through towns, abbeys, manor houses, and castles. Roads fill with wagons carrying beds, plate cooking pots. tapestries, documents, and winter clothing. Local nobles prepare feasts large enough to exhaust their storehouses. Bells ring as the king approaches. Children scatter herbs in the road. Civic officials kneel in mud while presenting speeches longer than the journey that brought Henry to hear them. At each lodging, servants spread rushes, hang tapestries, inspect chimneys, and prepare the royal privy. Kitchens roast meat from dawn. Ale is brewed, bread baked, and fish smoked for days when church custom forbids flesh. A folk remedy recommends carrying dried sage against foul air, while another suggests placing a bowl of vinegar near the bed. Some swear that vinegar absorbs sickness. It certainly absorbs the attention of anyone wondering why the chamber smells like a pickle barrel. Catherine rides beside the aging king beneath fur-lined cloaks. Henry appears proud of her youth and beauty. Crowds cheer the royal couple. In public, they seem content. At night, however, the Queen's household grows less simple. Doors open after candles should be extinguished. Trusted women carry messages. Lady Jane Rochford, widow of Anne Boleyn's brother, helps arrange private meetings. Culpeper appears where he should not always appear. Catherine's past and present begin drawing nearer to one another through galleries lit by dying flames. You hear laughter behind a closed oak door, then silence when footsteps approach. The half-burned candle in the passage gutters low. Wet wool hangs near the stair. Somewhere below, monastery bells mark an hour. No courtier wishes to name aloud. Henry sleeps believing his young queen has restored the happiness of his youth. Around him, gifts, music, whispered promises, and old secrets gather quietly beneath the palace roof. The laughter behind the oak door does not remain private for long. Secrets at court rarely disappear. They travel through servants' passages, dressing rooms, chapel porches, kitchens, laundries, and the quiet spaces beside staircases where people believe themselves unseen. A queen may sleep beneath cloth of gold, but her sheets are washed by someone, her letters carried by someone, and her midnight candles trimmed by someone who eventually speaks. The first danger comes from Catherine's past. John Lascelles, a reform-minded courtier, hears disturbing information from his sister Mary Hall, who once lived in the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk's household. Mary remembers the loose supervision, the late-night visits, and Catherine's relationships with Henry Manox and Francis Derham. Lascelles brings the story to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer faces an awkward task. Henry is deeply pleased with Catherine. The king has recently thanked God publicly for granting him such a virtuous wife. To suggest otherwise is not merely uncomfortable. It is the sort of discomfort that may end with a locked room, an iron key, and very little opportunity to explain oneself. Cranmer chooses caution. While Henry attends Mass on All Souls' Day in 1541, the Archbishop places a written statement in the king's hands. The document describes Catherine's past without confronting Henry publicly. At first, the king refuses to believe it. He orders a secret inquiry, perhaps expecting the accusations to dissolve beneath examination. Instead, they multiply. Investigators question people from the Duchess's household. Manox admits familiarity with Catherine. Derham is arrested and interrogated. Servants remember shared chambers exchanged tokens and words suggesting that Catherine and Derham once considered themselves promised to one another. This possibility is dangerous for a reason beyond scandal. Under the customs of the time, a valid pre-contract may make Catherine's marriage to Henry unlawful. If she has previously pledged herself to Derham in a binding way, she may never have been free to marry the king. Catherine denies that any formal contract exists, though she admits aspects of the relationship. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether refusing the pre-contract saves her dignity or destroys her best chance of survival. Accepting it might have allowed Henry to annul the marriage as he did with Anne of Cleves, yet it would also mean admitting that she entered the royal marriage while already bound to another man. In her chambers, Catherine is questioned by Cranmer. He finds her distressed, confused, and terrified. She weeps, struggles to speak, and appears close to collapse. Cranmer writes that she becomes calmer when he suggests the king may show mercy if she tells the full truth. Whether this reassurance is sincere, strategic, or simply meant to keep her from harming herself remains uncertain. Outside, daily palace life continues with eerie regularity. Servants spread new rushes over the floors, cooks stir pottage, bakers carry coarse loaves from ovens, guards change watch beneath dripping eaves, a maid places dried rosemary near a window because some believe its scent strengthens memory, though nearly every Anne involved in the inquiry suddenly remembers either far too much or far too little. Derham admits his earlier relationship with Catherine but accuses Thomas Culpeper of replacing him in her affection. Now the investigation turns from Catherine's past to her conduct as queen. Culpeper is arrested. Lady Jane Rochford is questioned. She has helped arrange private meetings during the Northern Progress, carrying messages and guiding Culpeper through dark corridors. At first, she hesitates. Then details emerge. Doors opened, 8 attendants dismissed whispered meetings in chambers where the king sleeps nearby. Catherine and Culpeper exchange letters. One survives, written in Catherine's hand, expressing longing and asking him to come when Lady Rochford can arrange it. The words are intimate, though they do not prove exactly what happens between them. Some swear the relationship is fully physical. Others believe it remains a dangerous courtship. Even now it is hard to tell whether private intention becomes action behind those locked doors. For Henry, the distinction matters less than the humiliation. The young queen who made him feel restored now appears to have deceived him. His response moves between disbelief, grief-fury, and wounded pride. Reports claim he weeps before his council, lamenting his misfortune in wives. This is a bold interpretation from a man currently on his 5th marriage, but nobody offers statistical guidance. Catherine is removed from court and confined at Sion House. Her jewels are taken. Her ladies are reduced. The music, dances, and bright gowns fall away, leaving cold chambers, wool blankets, guarded doors, and the slow sound of winter rain. She writes no grand defence like Catherine of Aragon, and gives no polished speech like Anne Boleyn. She is still very young, though her exact birth year remains uncertain. In confinement, she appears frightened, rather than politically calculating. Culpeper and Derham are tried for treason. Derham's earlier relationship with Catherine is treated as part of the Queen's deception. Culpeper's secret meetings with her are presented as intent against the king's honour and succession. Both men are convicted and executed in December 1541. Their deaths are public warnings, though the details need not follow you into sleep. Lady Rochford's condition deteriorates. She seems to suffer a mental collapse while imprisoned. Ordinarily, a person considered legally insane cannot be executed. Parliament conveniently passes a measure allowing it in cases of treason. Tudor law, you notice, often develops remarkable flexibility when an ending has already been chosen. Catherine's case does not receive a conventional public trial. Instead, Parliament passes an Act of Attainder declaring her guilty. The Act also makes it treason for a future queen to conceal her sexual history before marrying the king, placing a new and rather alarming responsibility upon royal courtship. Catherine is taken by barge to the Tower of London in February 1542. The river is grey beneath the winter sky. Mist gathers around the walls. Guards wait at the landing. She passes beneath gates through which Anne Boleyn once entered before her own final days. A popular legend claims Catherine asks for the execution block to be brought to her chamber so she can practice placing her head upon it. No reliable evidence confirms the story, but it survives because legends prefer rehearsed courage to sleepless fear. On the morning of February 13th, Catherine walks to the scaffold with Lady Rochford. She speaks briefly, asks for prayers, and dies with more composure than her frightened confinement might have suggested. The famous line, claiming she would rather die the wife of Culpeper than Queen of England, is almost certainly invented. It belongs to later storytellers who enjoy giving the dead sharper dialogue than the living ever recorded. Catherine is buried near Anne Boleyn in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. That evening the palace kitchens still prepare supper. Iron keys turn, candles are trimmed, rain darkens the courtyards. Henry remains king, surrounded by servants and guarded doors. Yet the lively queen who once danced beneath silver branches has vanished into memory. Only the whispers remain moving softly through the rushes long after everyone who began them has fallen silent. The whispers fade slowly, but they leave Henry's household colder than before. You walk through palace galleries where servants now speak with particular care around any unmarried woman of suitable birth. Catherine Howard's rooms are emptied, her jewels returned to royal chests, and her initials removed from embroidered hangings. Once again, craftsmen cover yesterday's queen beneath fresh thread and gilding. Henry remains alone for a time. His health worsens. The old wound in his leg refuses to heal properly. Physicians dress it with cloths, ointments, and poultices while debating the balance of his humours. Some recommend herbs boiled in wine, others apply plasters made from honey resin, animal fat, or ingredients whose usefulness depends heavily upon the patient, never asking what they contain. The king's body grows heavier and movement becomes painful. He is carried between chambers more often. Special chairs and mechanical devices help lift him onto a horse. His temper shifts with discomfort, and everyone nearby learns to recognize the difference between an ordinary frown and the sort requiring immediate retreat behind an oak door. Into this weary court comes Catherine Parr. She is not a young maid arriving from a loosely supervised household. She is an experienced widow, educated, composed, and familiar with illness. By the time Henry notices her, she has already buried 2 husbands and managed homes where medicine accounts, servants, property, and family obligations require steady judgment. Catherine is in her early 30s, close to Henry's eldest daughter, Mary, in age. She reads widely, speaks French, studies Latin, and takes religion seriously. She owns books, writes prayers, and joins conversations about reform that would make more cautious courtiers suddenly interested in the nearest tapestry. She also has feelings for Thomas Seymour, Jane Seymour's younger brother. Thomas is handsome, energetic, ambitious, and dangerous in the polished manner of men who know they are handsome, energetic, and ambitious. Catherine may hope to marry him. Henry, however, chooses her for himself. A request from the king is not easily refused. No one can quite agree whether Catherine feels affection for Henry at the beginning or accepts from duty, fear, ambition, religious purpose, or some mixture of all these. She understands what has happened to previous queens. She also knows that becoming queen gives her influence, security, and the chance to bring Henry's children into a more united household. She marries him in July 1543 at Hampton Court. The ceremony is quieter than the pageants of his youth. Beeswax candles glow against the chapel walls. Only a small gathering attends. Henry stands heavily beside Catherine, dressed in rich cloth and fur, while she speaks the vows that make her his 6th wife. The court watches closely. Catherine chooses the motto, "To be useful in all that I do." It proves accurate. She nurses Henry with patient attention. You see her seated beside him in a warm chamber where the windows are closed against damp air, and the fire burns beneath soot-black stone. She reads aloud while attendants change dressings on his leg. She helps manage his medicines, meals, moods, and hours of rest. A household remedy recommends washing wounds with wine or honey because both are believed to resist corruption. Some healers also use powdered herbs, egg white, or turpentine. Even now it is hard to tell which treatment comforts Henry and which merely gives the physicians something to discuss, while the Queen does the actual work. Catherine draws Mary Elizabeth and Edward closer to court. Mary is an adult woman by now, serious, learned, and devout. Elizabeth is a sharp, observant girl with red hair and a talent for languages. Edward remains the precious prince raised beneath strict supervision and surrounded by tutors. The 3 children differ in age, religion, status, and experience, yet Catherine treats each with warmth. She encourages their education and helps restore Mary and Elizabeth to the succession after Edward, though both daughters remain legally illegitimate. Henry's final succession act places them back in line for the crown. It is an untidy arrangement, but Tudor family order has long depended upon clerks writing confidently around contradictions. Elizabeth develops particular affection for Catherine. The Queen oversees her studies and provides an example of female learning rare even among noble households. Catherine discusses scripture, translates religious works, and writes for publication. Her prayers or meditations appears in 1545, making her the first English queen to publish a book under her own name. Later she produces The Lamentation of a Sinner, a more openly reforming work. These writings create danger England's religious direction remains unsettled. Some advisers favour reform. Others defend traditional doctrine. Henry himself permits certain changes while punishing anyone who moves farther than he wishes. The safest theological position is therefore wherever the king happens to be standing that morning. Catherine sometimes discusses religion with Henry while nursing him. She speaks about scripture, faith, and reform. At first, he tolerates or enjoys the conversation. Yet conservative courtiers, including Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Lord Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley, begin to present her learning as arrogance and her opinions as heresy. They search for evidence among women connected to Catherine's circle. Anne Askew, a reform-minded gentlewoman, is arrested and questioned. Officials hope to connect her to ladies of the Queen's household. She refuses to provide useful names. Her fate becomes severe, and though the details remain beyond the quiet path of tonight's story, the warning reaches every chamber in the palace. A warrant is prepared for Catherine's arrest. You hear the rumour before she does, whispered near a stair where wet cloaks hang beside an iron key. A servant carries the news. Catherine becomes frightened and, according to some accounts, collapses or weeps openly. She does not wait passively. When Henry later draws her into religious debate, Catherine changes her approach. She says that she has never intended to instruct him. She discusses difficult questions only to distract him from pain and to learn from his superior wisdom. The king accepts this explanation. Perhaps he believes her. Perhaps he understands the performance and chooses to protect her. Perhaps he simply enjoys hearing that every argument was secretly a compliment. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The following day, guards arrive with the arrest warrant. Henry angrily dismisses them. Wriothesley is insulted in front of the court, and Catherine remains free. She has come nearer than she may ever fully understand to joining the wives whose names are spoken in lowered voices. Afterward, she becomes more cautious. Her books remain important, but her conversations with Henry soften. She continues nursing him, managing the household, and guiding the royal children. She has not defeated the lion. She has learned when to soothe him and when to step quietly beyond reach. At night you see her close a prayer book beside the king's bed. The half-burned candle flickers in a silver holder. Henry sleeps beneath heavy wool and fur while rain brushes the palace windows. Catherine Parr sits beside him, still queen, still alive, and still useful in all that she does. The prayer book closes, but the palace does not sleep easily. You remain near Henry during the last years of his reign, when the king who once raced horses, sang in galleries, and entered tournaments beneath banners, now moves through rooms arranged around pain. Doors widen for his passage, chairs are strengthened, servants wait with cushions, blankets, warmed cloths, and staffs. The court still calls him magnificent, though magnificence now requires carpenters, physicians, cooks, and several anxious men lifting at once. His injured leg continues to trouble him. The wound opens, closes, swells, and drains according to rhythms nobody understands. Physicians approach with grave expressions and treatments drawn from humoral medicine. Household practice and inherited guesswork. They wash the sore with wine, apply honey, herbs, resin, grease, and linen, then discuss whether heat, cold dryness, or moisture has gained the upper hand. A doctor can always sound useful when all four possibilities remain available. You stand beside the chamber as an apothecary grinds rosemary, myrrh, and powdered substances in a mortar. The air smells sharp and bitter. Leeches wait in a jar nearby, though nobody seems eager to introduce them to the king without first checking his mood. Some swear that wearing a sapphire against the skin can cool anger and protect the body from poison. Henry owns enough jewels to test the theory, but the anger survives every gemstone. His meals remain lavish. Kitchens prepare beef venison, capons, pies, puddings, custards, preserved fruits, spiced wine, and white bread made from the finest flour. Fish arrives for fast days, though fasting at court can involve enough courses to exhaust a monastery pantry. Trenchers are changed, silver plate polished, and tasters stand ready, because fear of poison accompanies power, like a loyal hound. Henry eats beneath cloth of estate while musicians play. Courtiers watch every movement. If he laughs, the room warms. If he frowns, conversation thins at once. A dropped spoon can seem like a political statement when the king is tired. The household follows rituals. Gentlemen of the privy chamber dress him present garments, fasten jewels, and assist with washing. Linen shirts are changed, often a sign of cleanliness and wealth in a world where full bathing is less common than changing the cloth against the skin. Basins of water appear, towels are warmed, his beard is trimmed, his clothes grow wider, heavier, and more richly structured, built to preserve the image of strength, even when walking becomes difficult. You notice how everyone manages distance. Some advisers approach only after another man has tested the king's temper. Servants learn to read the set of his mouth before crossing the chamber. Ambassadors rehearse speeches, then shorten them if Henry shifts painfully in his chair. No one can quite agree whether his cruelty deepens because of illness or whether illness merely removes the charm that once concealed it. The palace itself seems shaped by his moods. At Whitehall, Hampton Court and other residences' galleries stretch between private chambers so he can move without crossing public courtyards. Tapestries soften cold walls, fires burn through the night. Rushes are replaced more frequently near his rooms, mixed with lavender and sweet herbs. Guards keep oak doors closed against drafts, petitioners, and inconvenient honesty. Outside those doors, England changes. Monasteries close their bells, silenced or carried away. Roof-lead is stripped, land passes to the crown and then to nobles, courtiers, and purchasers with ready money. Books scatter from libraries, reliquaries are broken or emptied. In some villages, people hide statues beneath floors or bury altar vessels, believing old devotion may return. Some swear that a concealed saint can protect a household even when wrapped in sacking beneath a barn. Henry hears reports of rebellion, heresy, treason, foreign threats, and disobedience. His council sends papers covered in seals and cramped writing. He approves punishments, grants lands, arranges marriages, and changes religious policy with the confidence of a man who expects certainty from everyone except himself. Yet there are quieter moments. You see him listening to music after supper, fingers resting heavily on the arm of his chair. A melody from his youth passes through the chamber. For a moment, the old brightness returns to his eyes. Perhaps he remembers Catherine of Aragon beside him at a tournament, Anne Boleyn laughing during a masque, Jane Seymour holding the promise of a son, Anne of Cleves bowing with careful courtesy, Catherine Howard dancing beneath silver candles, or Catherine Parr reading beside his bed. No one knows which memories he allows himself. Prince Edward visits under close supervision. The boy bows, speaks carefully, and receives his father's approval. Mary appears with grave dignity. Elizabeth watches everything, storing expressions and silences with the precision of a scribe. Catherine Parr helps keep these meetings orderly, softening pauses and guiding conversation away from dangerous ground. By late 1546, Henry weakens further. His movement becomes severely limited. A mechanical chair may carry him between rooms. Servants use slings or lifting devices, though later tales exaggerate these contraptions into almost legendary machines. Even now it is hard to tell exactly how he is moved, because royal dignity prefers not to leave instructions for hauling a king upstairs. His final winter settles over Whitehall. Frost whitens the roofs, horse breath clouds the courtyards. Storehouses hold salted meat grain, dried peas and barrels of ale. Inside fires glow against carved stone, while physicians whisper beyond curtains. Henry's temper remains feared, but his world narrows to bedchair prayer medicine and reports carried into dim rooms. The king, who once commanded every space, now depends upon attendants to turn him beneath wool blankets. In January 1547, the end approaches. Advisers hesitate to tell him how near it is, because speaking of a monarch's death can resemble treason. Archbishop Cranmer is summoned. Henry cannot manage long words, so he grips Cranmer's hand as a sign of faith. You hear no grand final speech, only breathing fire settling in a hearth and distant bells beyond the river. On January 28th, Henry dies. For several hours, officials keep the news quiet while arrangements begin. Meals are still carried toward his chamber to preserve appearances. Servants bow before a closed door, behind which the king no longer waits. The palace remains obedient to his mood, even after he has none. The closed door at Whitehall does not remain closed forever. News of Henry's death passes from chamber to chamber, then across courtyards, bridges, frozen roads, and market squares. Bells sound for the king, and people remove caps beneath a pale January sky. Some mourn, some calculate. Most keep buying bread and wondering what might change under young King Edward. You follow the royal household as it rearranges itself around absence. Henry's body is prepared, guarded, and carried toward Windsor. Black cloth hangs across halls, candles burn beside heraldic banners. Servants walk softly over fresh rushes while officials argue about precedence even in mourning. Henry is buried beside Jane Seymour, who gave him his son and never lived long enough to trouble his memory of her. Yet Henry does not carry the 6 women into silence with him. Catherine of Aragon remains present in Mary. The princess who once watched her mother lose crown, household, and husband becomes queen in 1553. Mary restores the old religion, remembers Catherine's steadfast faith, and treats her parents' marriage as lawful in every way that matters to her. Her reign later gathers darker legends, but you can still see Catherine's discipline in Mary's careful prayers, formal manners, and refusal to surrender what she believes is right. Anne Boleyn survives in Elizabeth. The little girl once declared illegitimate becomes queen in 1558 and rules for more than 4 decades. Elizabeth rarely speaks openly of her mother, yet she preserves Anne's falcon badge among her possessions and sometimes wears a ring believed to contain miniature portraits of herself and Anne. No one can quite agree whether every object linked to Anne is genuine because Tudor relics multiply wherever collectors possess hope and a convincing box. Jane Seymour lives through Edward, though only briefly. The long-awaited prince becomes king at 9 and dies at 15. His education, Protestant faith and royal seriousness shape England despite his youth. Portraits show a narrow-faced boy dressed with the stiffness of a miniature Henry one hand resting near a dagger while tutors, counsellors and ambitious uncles compete to guide him. Anne of Cleves continues quietly beyond them all. She keeps houses, plays cards, visits, court exchanges, gifts with Mary and Elizabeth, and maintains the comfortable independence purchased by agreeing not to remain queen. Some later stories describe her as ugly or foolish, but the surviving woman appears practical, sociable, and shrewd enough to leave Henry's marriage with lands, money, and peace. She dies in 1557 and receives an honourable burial in Westminster Abbey, the only one of the 6 wives buried there. Catherine Howard leaves fewer objects and more rumours. Her youth becomes simplified into a tale of vanity and betrayal, though the frightened girl behind the legend remains harder to recover. A letter to Culpeper survives as a fragile trace of her own hand. Some swear she runs screaming through Hampton Court, seeking Henry's mercy, and a gallery is still linked to the story, though reliable evidence does not support the scene. Legends prefer corridors, ghosts, and desperate footsteps to quiet paperwork. Catherine Parr outlives Henry and finally marries Thomas Seymour. For a brief time, she creates a learned household around Elizabeth and Lady Jane Grey, yet her happiness proves short. She gives birth to a daughter, Mary Seymour, in 1548 and dies soon afterward, probably from the same kind of childbirth infection that killed Jane Seymour. Her published books endure, preserving a voice thoughtful, devout, cautious, and more independent than Henry ever fully understood. You pass through storerooms where objects remain after their owners vanish. A prayer book bears Catherine of Aragon's notes. Anne Boleyn's initials hide beneath later carving. Jane's phoenix appears on stone. Anne of Cleves's portrait still meets the viewer calmly. Catherine Howard's jewels have been reset for others. Catherine Parr's words rest in printed pages, their ink long dry. Even now it is hard to tell whether the familiar rhyme of divorced beheaded died, divorced beheaded survived clarifies anything at all. It is tidy, memorable, and almost entirely centred on Henry. The women themselves are less tidy. They are daughters, queens, widows, mothers, readers, patrons, prisoners, survivors, and believers, each moving through a world where marriage can decide religion, legitimacy, property, and life. The Tudor court fades around you. Banners are folded. Silver is locked in oak chests. A final servant lifts the old rushes from the stone floor. Outside, frost lies upon the road, and a distant abbey bell marks an hour beyond Henry's hearing. You leave the palace slowly. No herald follows, and no trumpet urges your tired feet onward tonight. The torches behind you grow smaller, and the river mist gathers again, softening towers' walls and the dark outlines of winter trees. Your boots find the same muddy road that carried you toward the young golden king so many years ago. The air is cold, but the wind has fallen. Somewhere near the gate an old dog might once have waited for a scrap of bread, though now there is only a faint paw mark, filling with clear water. You walk without hurry. Behind shuttered windows cooks bank their fires. Monks lower their voices over the last prayers of night. In cottages beyond the fields, wool blankets rise and fall with sleeping breath. A candle bends above a prayer book, then steadies. The relic no one trusted rests forgotten in its box. The broken cart wheel has long since become kindling. Ahead, darkness settles gently across the road. Catherine, Anne, Jane. Anne, Catherine. And Catherine recede from queens into names, then from names into quiet shapes beneath painted ceilings and chapel stone. Their footsteps no longer echo, their gowns no longer brush the rushes. Their fears, hopes, and small private comforts drift outward like smoke leaving the rafters. You reach a roadside fire and lower yourself beside it. The warmth touches your hands. The flame softens to amber. Beyond it the medieval world grows still, its bells distant, its towers dim, its troubled king finally silent. Nothing asks anything more of you tonight. The road can wait. The palace can wait. History itself can close its heavy oak door and rest. You breathe slowly while the last ember settles into darkness and the long Tudor night folds around you quiet, warm, and deep.